when we like something, it becomes a part of us. When we like something, we tend to defend it and say it's a good thing because it's us. Anytime we identify with something as us and start to defend it, though, it can lead us down a bad path. It is important to stay philosophically detached from ideas and people so we can keep our minds flexible and willing to say that we are wrong and adapt. If you want to learn about cannabis health, business, and technique efficiently and with good cheer, I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. We'll send you new podcast episodes as they come out, delivered right to your inbox, along with commentary on a couple of the most important news items from the week and videos too. Don't rely on social media to let you know when a new episode is published. Sign up for the updates to make sure you don't miss an episode. Also, we're giving away very cool prizes to folks who are signed up to receive the newsletter. This month, we will randomly choose 4 newsletter subscribers to receive 3 packs of seeds from Pride of the Lion Seeds in Mendocino. Check out their Instagram profile at Pride of the Lion Seeds and request their new catalog of over 150 photo period and autoflower seed varieties. There's nothing else you need to do to win except receive the newsletter, so go to shapingfire.com to sign up for the newsletter and be entered into this month's and all future newsletter prize drawings. You are listening to Shaping Fire, and I'm your host, Shango Los. My guest today is Dan Jimmie, more commonly known in the underground as Full Duplex. Dan is founder and breeder at Gnome Automatics, formerly known as Mandalorian Genetics, an award-winning and exceptionally well-respected line of autoflower seeds. Dan is also co-founder of Autoflower.net, the center of the autoflower breeding and cultivation universe since 2010. Dan and I are both well-known evangelists of autoflower plants, but today we're going to focus on everything about them that we find difficult and annoying. Welcome back to Shaping Fire, Dan.
Shango, thanks for having me back, man. I really appreciate it.
You know, it's kind of funny that we're doing this particular topic since you and I are both known as evangelists for autoflowers. You know, we're both, talking up autoflowers all the time. And here we are going to do a show where we're essentially talking trash about autoflowers.
Exactly. The aspects of what we absolutely don't like about them. We have, like you said, we're both evangelists for the autoflower plant. We've seen a massive, wave come across the industry as they're progressing forward, but there's also a lot of things about them that just get rather frustrating.
Yeah, no doubt. I've grown over 150 varieties, like 158 varieties of autoflower, and I tell people they should try them, and I highly recommend them for patients and for people with space constraints. But my gosh, I get frustrated just like everybody else with some of the characteristics. So thank you for joining me today so we can talk about all the things we hate.
Absolutely, dude. I think it's going to be a great conversation for people to realize, that even though we love them so much that, like you just said, we get frustrated, we run into problems. And I think it's good to kind of see both sides of that, kind of bring it both to light.
Right on. So with that, let's start on this list. And that's how we're going to handle the show today. We're just going to go through all of these different categories of things that we find frustrating about autoflowers. And what's funny is that as Dan and I were getting ready for this show and we were putting up a list, it was really shocking that the list was so long, like just looking at it really quick, I think there's like 15 or so here. And it's amazing that something that has got so many downsides or challenges would actually be something that we like so much. So let's start right at the top, Dan. So since you're the breeder, I'll let you start with our first one here about seed inconsistency, and we're going to talk about the seed inconsistency in one pack, and also inconsistent seeds from breeder to breeder. So why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate you letting me take off with this. So let's just dive right into it. The inconsistent seeds in one pack. I remember coming over to a Vimeo events back before we had become so close friends, and you had made a comment that, one of the things with autoflowers is when you open up a 10-pack of maybe feminized or regular, it's literally like opening up a pack of Pokemon cards. You have no idea what you're going to get. And that was a frustration point for me very early on. And I think it's partly why I went down the rabbit hole so far, was because, we're getting these seeds in from Europe. They're being mass produced in warehouses because the majority, like we've talked about in the history of autoflowers, so a lot of this really started off in Spain. And when you have such big crops being produced into seed, there's multiple parents from both sides, whether they're being reversed and making feminized seed, or they're being, traditionally bred male-female. There's more than one pollen donor usually in a room. And I think that's one of the biggest things that leads to, and I know it is from experimentation myself, the inconsistency that we see in a 3-pack to a 10-pack,
Yeah. And, it's frustrating for most of us who have spent most of our growing time with photo periods. You might have a line of something and there might be 3 or 4 or 5 phenos within the line. And so if you're going to get your 8 or 10 or 12 pack, you may see, 2 or 3 or 4 or all of these different phenos. But, a well-made seed run will have fewer phenos in it, so that most everybody who's growing it is getting an example plant that is closer to the intention of the breeder. But my gosh, when you get phenos in autoflower packs, sometimes you're lucky to see 2 of the same pheno in a pack just because they've got so much variety. And that can be incredibly frustrating as a grower, especially if you're growing in small volume, right? If you are growing, just your 5 or 6 legal plants in most states, and you really like a particular variety and you're growing it hoping to get a few of that same plant, and you either don't get the target pheno that you wanted, the one that's on Instagram, the one that looks incredible, or like in your case, right? This year I grew a lot of your stuff, and most of your popular stuff is purple, but then there's like the purple on purple, which takes the great photos, right? And so right. I grew wanting what I saw in your photographs, and I was lucky because I got that purple, and I'm assuming that that's because I was running F4s of yours. So these were seed. This was a seed line that was worked to a degree, so there was less variety of phenos, and that's why. If we find somebody who's putting out unworked lines of autoflowers, sometimes they're fun to see all the phenos, but you're just going to get more variety versus a more mature line that like you tend to put out where your plants are more the same. I understand that, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the best way I could have, described it myself. I put the work in, we'll use Anvil, for example. I would say it's my most consistent cultivar that I've ever put out. It's been inbred to F8. The first feminization of that line was F7 to F7. That was its first reversal. And even in the offspring of the first reversal, all the fem seeds pretty much came out the same. And by pretty much, I'm not going to say it was a completely uniform uniform expression across every one of the seeds that were sold, but it was very close. And that comes from that consistent working and developing that, narrowing down your phenotypical, your phenotypes to pollinate the pollen receivers in the room. So if that's either a feminization or a regular, male-female pollination run, the idea is matching parents. And those matching parents, that math, and I use that in air quotes, has worked out to me to produce something so stable across any seed that cracks from Anvil.
And I guess it's only fair to point out that, even though we used you as an example and I've grown your seeds and we're friends, that there are plenty of breeders out there that are working their lines. This is not a commercial for Gnome Automatics, right? Even though I like growing your stuff. The point is that if you want to have less variety in your seeds, make sure that you buy from a seed producer who cares about decreasing increasing the phenos, because there are certainly people who intentionally put out packs that are, great for hunting, do your own sift, lots of variety. These type of breeder packs are great for their purpose. But, if you're a home grower and you want to grow the plant that's on the Instagram that looks like the picture, you're definitely going to want to get something that has been worked a lot more. It just depends on the kinds of the kind of experience you're looking for.
100%. There are several other wonderful breeders out here in the autoflower realm that put the work in and actually do the testing and produce these generational lines, whether it's just consistently feminizing them for each generation or traditional, selection male female, and then feminizing them once they find a nice, group of seeds that are coming out and expressing the same. There are several guys out there with that focus. And one other thing I'd like to touch on about, you mentioned just slightly about like the home grower with the inconsistency, and a lot of these states that are legal now, they have a very tight plant count. Some people don't want to invest a lot of money into a big setup. They're not going out and buying your 4x4 tents and your 6 and 750 or up to 1,000 watt LEDs or HIDs. They're dealing with a very small space. And if you've got inconsistencies in the pack, sure, some of those might stay within a height of, say a 2x2x4 size tent that they're growing in their closet, but then there could be a rogue pheno in that pack that literally pushes the light to the top of the tent, and they're going to have a bad experience with that. It's going to turn them off to seeing all this. Like, well, there's too much variety. How do I control this to keep it, yielding successfully in my environment?
Yeah, very true. And also, I think it's important to point out too that because the lineage of ruderalis in our scene, I mean, while it goes back, well over a decade, it doesn't. The ruderalis lines have not been bred nearly as much as photoperiods, right? And so Correct. Not only are you going to get a lot of variety within a pack, generally speaking, if we look at the entire pool of seeds, but you're also going to get a lot of variety from breeder to breeder, because with photoperiods, a newish breeder is generally going to take something that is already popular or reliable or hype, and they will make that cross. And so they're starting with really reliable seeds that have got a lot of breeding history and a lot of stability in them to begin with. And then, it's like, what do they say? Shooting the side of a barn, right? It's like really hard to miss when you're breeding things that are already stable in and of themselves, and people have been, breeding them for years. Whereas there's a whole bunch of wild still in these ruderalis lines, and somebody who is a new to breeding, they very well may not have the experience or the time to get those seeds up to snuff. And so, you might find seeds cheaper, or they might be given to you by a friend who's just starting out at, growing autoflowers or breeding autoflowers. But, most of the new stuff, the wild isn't bred out of it like it is with many of the photoperiods, or most of the photoperiods that we have access to. And so that means that novice growers are really making novice seeds, whereas with photos, a novice breeder can make really good seeds on accident right out of the gate.
And I agree with you 100%. And we're starting to see that with the autoflower community too. There are a lot of, people out there who have done the work, who've put in the structure, who have helped build up this cultivar and sang its praises for years, and have finally starting to make their way in to being respected as an autoflower breeder. Because for a long time, I mean, we've talked about this, autoflower was a lot of times a joke of the cannabis industry. And we're seeing some of these newer breeders coming up and using stuff that's already been built upon all the work, and brings me to the point that even though they're doing that, they're still getting inconsistencies, because they're not taking like two seeds from one brand, two cultivars from one brand, and using those for their breeding project. They're usually taking something from, we'll say Mephisto, for example, and then Night Owl. And I'm just using names just as placeholders here. And then they throw them together, and they're not getting the result that they look for because of that wild nature of the ruderalis. Everybody's breeding style is still very relatively new. The angle of attack is very different in structural wise of what people are looking for. And I think people still don't quite understand the mechanics of the autoflowering plant. And I think all of that comes into the inconsistency that we're seeing from breeders to breeders. You see the quality stuff come out from guys who've been working them generationally, and you start to see some sketch stuff from somebody who's coming up and they're trying to just force it on the community and take hold of the autoflower wave.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you would mention Mephisto and Night Owl, because I would say that those two brands are at the top of people starting with those who are just starting out wanting to make autoflower seeds, because they'll take a couple of Mephistos and run them against each other, or they'll take a Mephisto and pollinate it with something from Daz, or something like that, and you'll see these crosses just because they've got such great reputations. And the only reason I wasn't mentioning your brand, Gnome Automatics, is because honestly, your stuff is sold out so fast until just recently. You've been making larger numbers of packs now, and so now they're more available to people who want them. But your first runs like sold out so quickly. You're like, oh yeah, those are already sold out, and like, oh damn. But yeah, I think I've seen so many crosses that are one Mephisto against another Mephisto, and the person is trying to get their favorite qualities out of both, and it just seems to be a pretty common place for people to start.
It does, and again, those, like I said, those were complete placeholders. I mean, those are two. Mephisto's been around forever. Daz and I have a fantastic relationship. I love that guy to death, and it's no tack on either one of them. It's just an example, because then there are people out there that are trying to build from the ground up, and so you've got like a multitude of angles of which we do see the inconsistency from breeder to breeder. And you are correct. I don't want this to be about a commercial about Gnome Automatics, even though it would be amazing. But, it's like I have been fortunate now to figure out a few more things with inside my plant counts to make more seed for people, because I've, adjusted my process and adapted over the last couple of years since things started taking off. It was pretty much I had to if I wanted to stay with what I'm doing right now.
Right on. So I think we've hit the seed inconsistency part pretty sufficiently. Anything else you want to say there before we move on to the next topic?
No, I think that flowed very well, dude. We got some depth in there and give people a good, I would say a little closer than 10,000 foot view on why they see what they're seeing.
All right, let's talk about light intensity. So, we're all pretty much aware that when you're germinating a seed, you generally want to do so under a little weaker light than a high caliber 800 or 1,000 watt light. You just want to give it that kind of nursery experience. But one of the things that's really odd about autoflowers is they really don't like the intensity of light until they are a bit older. And I have stunted my plants a variety of times because I germinated the seed and I put it into the tent with a high intensity BIOS LED light. And it just didn't want to go. It was almost like the bright light was too harsh for the youthful nature of the plant, and instead of it sucking up the light and growing swiftly, it actually seems to have slowed it. And I suspect that has been your experience too.
100%. I have seen high intensity. Autos have a love-hate relationship with light intensity and duration. At the early stages, as you were mentioning, they want a weaker, less intense light to allow them to come up, put their first set of leaves up, and start kind of moving along. And some people may jump the gun if they're running new age LED and dial it up a little bit more, or bring it a little bit closer to the plant. And one thing I always suggest is let the plant, to avoid this stunting that's very frustrating, because I actually just did it this past run again, two in a row. I'm learning some, I'm playing with things, but let that plant grow to the light, because when it first comes out and it starts germinating, if it needs more light, it's going to tell you it needs more light. It's going to do what I call the ninth inning stretch. It's going to give itself that first set of leaves, and then that main stem is just going to get longer and longer and longer and longer. And if you notice that elongation, then you can dial up that light intensity by, small increments, so you don't inevitably stunt that plant from trying to push. And the double-edged sword of that is, once they get to that more mature state, if you want to help, which is going to be our next topic, yield, you need to make sure that intensity and light hour time is there.
It's one of the reasons why I put in the extra effort to buy a light that actually has got an integrated dimmer. I love that dimmers have evolved for grow lights, and so when I'm starting my autoflowers out, I had to do it the wrong way first, right? I ruined 2 rounds of seeds before I realized that my full power BIOS light was just like kicking these seedlings' asses. They just couldn't handle it, and so right. I turned down the dimmer, so it was to about half power, and that helped a lot. And so I turned it up once the gosh, I don't know the botanical name, but the young leaves, when they grow up tall enough, they're low, and then they kind of like shrivel up and go away. And we tend to talk about them at that point as being like teenagers, right? That's right. When I turn it up to full blast. Because if I turn it up too fast on these small plants, they're like, nope, we're just going to stay here at 3 inches forever.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things that I've noticed too, is like if you turn that thing up too quick, your internodal spacing becomes so stacked that like it's putting all that energy there. It'll impact your side shoot growth, so any kind of side branching that could have been there is going to be impacted, because like the nodes sit so closely, and you have to maintain that balance between giving it enough to get it started, and then that preteen or teenager stage when, the plant's sexed, we're starting like under a jeweler's loop, you can start to see the sex organs come out. I mean, we could touch on the botanical terms of that too, but for the conversation, like when you start to see that underneath a jeweler's loop, and that's when you can start to bring up that intensity, because if you bring it up too soon, like you said, that plant's going to stay at like 3, maybe 4 inches tall and pretty much be pissed off at you its entire life. And you're going to get frustrated. You're going to, think that you failed. But we're here trying to tell you that like this frustration hurts us all. We all do it. We've all done it. And I still do it to this day.
And, even with all this, all these complaints we've got, we're still both in love with autoflowers. So it's really
I'm not quitting.
Yeah, totally. It's really just about finding, getting into relationship with this new plant that has got different characteristics than we're used to with photos.
Correct.
So our next topic is probably the number one thing that people complain about when it comes to autoflower, and that's yield. And it's funny, before pandemic, when I was traveling to conventions and teaching about autoflowers and kind of banging the autoflower drum, the number one question I got from people was, yeah, but can they grow big? Because we love growing these monster plants. And I love growing monster plants too. The whole monster plant thing, though, really did take off with California's 99 medical plant count, where suddenly every single plant had to be a beast, and that really strengthened that large plant culture. And they're beautiful, and I'm in no way dissing on large plants, but really large plants are not really the end all when it comes to choosing a plant, because there are a lot of reasons why the size per plant, you may actually want it to be smaller. Say, for example, you are doing it in a tent, or you're doing it in a small closet, kind of a shoebox grow, or if you need to keep your plants short so that your neighbors can't see them over the fence, or if you are a patient with poor mobility. They're like, how the heck are you gonna harvest a 10, 12 foot plant when your arthritis is so bad you can barely lift your arms above your shoulders, right? And so
right.
So I guess clearly I went right into defensive nature about the yield, but yeah, the problem is that the plants are small, and sometimes you may only pull an ounce off of a plant, which, you know, if you're used to pulling pounds, pulling off an ounce it's going to feel very lackluster to you.
Yeah, it'll feel very unsatisfactory. You know, I think I agree with you. Big, beautiful trees like monster plants are amazing. You know what I mean? Like I'll get on that train. I've grown quite a few big ones myself, and it's fun to watch, but it is, like you said, it's a ton of work. A lot of the people that you and I deal with are medical patients. I try to, you know, ooze that energy out when I'm, you know, talking to other podcasts and I'm talking to other people or behind the scenes in DMs that, like, you know, patient minded here. You know, it's hard for somebody to climb up a ladder or hang trellis or trim all of that by themselves. I mean, I'm fortunately still physically very, you know, capable, but like when I've got a greenhouse that's got 6 gigantic plants, it takes me weeks to harvest that alone. And, you know, I could see the deterrent of with autoflowers being smaller and the yields being less than that, because that's what we have seen for so long now that it could turn people off to it. But at the same time, in the mind, you're still getting an ounce at a minimum for most of your autoflowers these days of your own homegrown flower that you started from the seed, you germinated, and you grew it. I would say, you know, more, or not traditional, but more modern era autoflowers are, you know, you can have a few mistakes with them and still get more than an ounce. But I could see where yield and discrepancy, especially from the big farm compared to like a home grower. You know, a home grower is not going to have the opportunity to grow 7 to 8 to 10 foot tall plants.
Yeah, that's going to be pretty rare. But, you know, even though we're talking about yield and how it relates to size, in my experience, the yield per inch of the plant is actually quite good. You know, you might get a small plant, but the amount of flowers you get off that small plant is going to be on par with a photo period plant of that side. And has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed with autoflowers, the bud structures indoor, let me caveat that first, indoor are a lot tighter because a majority of people are just really starting to grow autoflowers indoors. And with the, you know, the intense light hours, you know, 18 or more, I always recommend don't go anything lower than 16 or you're going to impact your yield. You know, I have conversations on the regular in different forums about like, well, what if we just 12 them? It's like, it's going to impact the yield. And even though this plant may be a foot tall or something like that, the flower is basically the entire plant. Like the entire plant puts off flowers in every direction, especially with side branching and things of that nature. So indoor, my experience has been better structure, better yield. Yes.
I think that also the autoflowers tend to grow their individual flowers together into what many people will describe as either like a baseball bat stalk or a you know, cola the size of your arm. You know, people will talk about. It's very common for a you know, a petite autoflower plant that's going to be under 3 feet to be stocky. You know, it's fat. It's got a huge primary cola. And so your weight for space is exactly where you would want it to be. And so when we talk, you know, and complain about yield, we're really not talking about how much flower per inch. We're really only talking about the size of the plant. And, you know, if you have got you know, if you're in the kind of situation, you know, so instead of growing one big plant, grow 3 autoflowers and you're going to get the same yield, but you know, you're growing 3 plants instead of 1. And so there are ways around that. You know, if you've got strict plant counts and that is something that you are concerned with, well, then that's not the best solution. But a lot of people I know who are growing for themselves and growing autoflowers, they're just growing them on their deck. And whether or not there are 5 plants on their deck or 10 plants on their deck, doesn't really matter to a lot of folks.
Yeah, it doesn't, you know, and I see that up. a lot up here. And I also agree with you too. Like it comes back to that space. Like if you got 3 of them in that tent and you've given them an indoor 16 to 18 hours of light or more during the day, a lot of people run 24 hours across those 3 plants. If you grew, you're going to get a great yield. If you compare to growing one large plant inside that single space area, it's kind of going to balance its way out. I mean, sure, you got a little bit more plant care to take care of rather than just focusing your energy on one plant, but I think it's kind of a wash between the two.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of established that, yeah, the plants are smaller, but the yield for the smaller plant is on par with a photo, let's finish off this set by talking about terpene profiles. So, oh boy, there's so much to say. Why don't you get us started on this one?
So, I mean, I'll come right out and say it. It's very hard to find the terpene profiles that people would consider hype. And people consider hype 2 different things. It may be either like some kind of cookies, or it could be some kind of unique, specific terpene profile, whichever it is. But like with ruderalis, this is one of those nasty things we're still trying to find out, is the fact that we get a lot of earth, we get a lot of spice, we get a lot of
pining.
There's a lot of like incense, like nagchampa smell to them, like traditional early on terpenes before we really started, advancing the way photoperiods are. And we talked about earlier that like the photoperiod breeding game has been going on way longer than when the autoflower scene has really come forward. And we're working diligently on trying to improve that. I have expanded my realm into photoperiods that have been grown and selected into this area to try to source in some of those new terpene profiles, so I can get the sweeter candy smells, and so I can get the stuff that appeal, or the gas. I gave you a tester this summer called methane, and I finally found 2 outliers that actually had a traditional fuel smell. I'm not going to say like straight up gasoline, but there was a fuel, like diesel-y, like petrol smell to these plants, and it was shocking to me. And I worked with those 2. But the terpenes, they do need a lot of work. And I'll be the first to admit, like there's some of the plants that I have that they don't smell that great, but the smoke is fantastic. So it's trying to bridge all those gaps. So there's some serious work, I believe, that needs to be done, and it's frustrating because it takes time.
Yeah, especially on that gas smell, gas, fuel, it's very popular right now, but also it's my favorite, right? I still go for that. I mean, I have yet to find, actually, that's not true. I was going to say I have yet to find a terpene I don't like, but that's actually not true. I'm not really a big fan of the burnt rubber aspect that comes out in some skunk lineages. It was startling the first time I tasted burnt rubber out of a plant. I really thought that I had done something drastically wrong with this plant, and then I looked it up and I'm like, oh, this is actually a profile that's common. But anyway, other than that, the gas ones are still pretty rare in autoflowers, so rare that after my 150 some varieties, I've really only found it in one plant. And I must say that I haven't grown your methane yet. Your methane is actually one of them that I stunted with too bright of lights already. So I need to take another approach with the methane with my dimmer now installed. But the Humboldt Seed Company sour apple that just came out this year, they were kind enough to send some seeds my way, and that one has got an authentic gas in it, and it's actually paired with a green apple, so it actually makes for a pretty interesting plant. This kind of green Granny Smith apple with a fuel taste to it. But if you're going to autoflowers to replicate the same profiles that you're getting on your photoperiod plants, the lines are just not mature enough that you are going to be satisfied. When you approach autoflowers, it really will serve you to find out what autoflowers have to say and how do autoflowers like to express themselves, and then be happy with that. And I'm not saying that everything in autoflowers is watered down, but there are definitely some terpene profiles that are more successful in autoflowers than others. Like we've already said, fuel is pretty hard. But if you like the grape, Jolly Rancher kind of sweetness of candy smells. Oh my gosh, you're gonna love the candy possibilities in Autoflowers. There's also good bubble gum in Autoflowers. Certainly there is great, pining, earthy, incense kind of stuff that you've already hit on. But when I first started experimenting with Autoflowers, I wanted my Autoflower to taste like the similar parent in photo periods, and it's just not really how it works out, because not only are you adding this, the ruderalis genetics, which naturally pretty much just tastes like grass or hay. It's not a wonderfully tasting plant on its own. But it is the relationship with the terpenes that the breeder brings into the storyline and then has to refine over generations to get them out. And it doesn't mean it's a lesser plant than going only photo. It just means that the breeding history of it is so young that they've got a while to go. And there are a lot of really great tasting Autoflowers. But like every summer I'll grow my photo periods and my autos, and it's usually the autos that have got better terpene profiles because they're more mature lines. But here's the thing, where I live in the Pacific Northwest, none of those photo period plants can really finish outdoors. It's pretty rare for those plants to get all of their 8 to 9.5 weeks to finish. And so the question is, if we're going to grow it outdoors, are we more interested in growing photo periods that are not going to fully mature and finish? Or do I want to grow an autoflower that will totally mature and finish, and do so conveniently in the beginning of September instead of waiting for October, not finishing and dealing with mold of the photo periods? And, that's a pretty complex answer that most people who just say, autoflowers suck compared to photos. It's like, well, there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, friend, but like, where do you live? What are your needs? What's your health? What's your growing situation? You really have to weigh all these different attributes before disposing of the idea of autoflowers. I just finished a great purple lemonade, and it's one of the best smelling, most delightful to smoke plants that I've ever grown, and it's an autoflower, and it just wails on so many of the mediocre photo periods that I've grown. But it was still only 3 foot.
Well, right, and I think you hit the nail on the head right there, man. With the grow season that we have and the location that we're at, I've struggled for 3-4 years outdoor now to finish some of these photo periods that they look great, they smell great, but there's just not enough time for that maturity. I've grown like wedding cake, and I've grown runts, all this from cuts and cherry OG, and I've had the benefit of being shared with of all these different wonderful smelling photo periods. But the problem is they don't get to fully mature, so I don't get to enjoy that full mature profile of that plant. Whereas with my autos, I've already got them down, dried, and in jars while I'm still struggling to fight the rains and the molds and the mildews.
So true. You just described my life, man. That is so satisfying to have the autoflowers harvested, dried, and in jars curing and already like sneaking buds out to smoke, while the photo periods are still outside in the greenhouse dealing with sub 50 degree nights, wondering if they're ever going to finish at all.
Well, right. Once we break below 55 degrees, photosynthesis really likes to slow down. So you're not only adding in the combating of the mold and the mildew, you're dealing with a long running strain to begin with that runs in 8, 9, 10 weeks maybe, and then you deal down with the actual slowing of the metabolism of the plant. So you've compounded issues, whereas autos are done. It's done. It's ready to go. You can smoke them while you're trying to figure out how to finish out your photo period crop.
So let's see. I've got something else I want to suggest with the terpene profiles of autos. And and I can't say I know this to be true, but I have seen a lot of circumstantial evidence on my side, and I would be curious, or I would hasten to say that autoflowers may have a difficult time holding the same smell that they have while they're flowering. I would say that just about all the autoflowers I have grown, we all expect the flavors of the terpenes to evolve in cure, for sure. That's part of what we're trying to do. But with most autoflowers, what I end up taking out of the jar smells very little like the plant did when it was alive. And that can be startling. What do you think?
It's funny, I expected you to ask me if there was going to be one more thing before we moved on to another subject or something, and you literally stole the thought from my head. Oh. I have seen a lot of what I call loss of translation. It'll grow great. I'll get a nice chemically smell, or I'll get a nice, very pronounced, like cotton candy smell, or even a very pronounced fuel smell, and be like, oh man, here it is, finally. And then you do the slow dry. I do a 60-60 dry cure environment, or dry environment where it's 60 degrees and 60% RH, and try to let those things go as low and slow as possible to maintain these terpene profiles. And I don't know if it is the fact that the plant can't translate it well enough, or if they're still so volatile in the genetics and the early of the breeding that they're gone by the time they go through the drying process. So could this open up another way that we dry our autos slightly different than the practices we've been using our photo periods in? I don't know. But I have noticed that loss in translation myself multiple times. So I'm so excited about what it's outside, and I've got 3 or 4 females that are in a breeding program. Like, finally, I've got a multiple that are bringing this out, and 1 out of the 6 may hold on to a 10th of that smell that I smelled on the plant, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, this is very true. I share that experience. And for me, that's one of the reasons why I don't hold on to autoflowers as long as I would my photo periods. I will either, as soon as they're ready to go, I will start to smoking them right away, start giving them to friends, things like that. Or what I generally do with most of my autos is make hash, because that seems to stabilize it pretty effectively. But I don't know what's going into the plant. I don't know if it's, a volatile monoterpenes that we're losing right away, or maybe there's something going on with the sugars in the plants that it actually cures differently than a photo period does. And, I don't think there's any science on any of this yet, which just again speaks to the fact that even though autoflowers have been around, 15, 20 years, that with the modern autoflowers, we're still just getting to know them.
Right. I think we're still getting to know them. I think it's still a learning avenue. And I think there's a lot more that, comes across with the Ruderalis genetics than what we think. Yeah,
I agree with that. So you have anything else to say about terpene profiles before we wrap up this set?
No, I think I'm good.
Right.
You definitely grabbed that last thought right out of the brain, so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Right on. So we're going to go ahead and take a short break and be right back. You're listening to Shaping Fire, and my guest today is cannabis breeder Dan Jimmie. There are so many seed banks nowadays that you really have options in who to choose. Not only that, if you pick the wrong seed bank, you could be in for a really sketchy ride. And that's only one of the reasons I recommend Hembra Genetics Collection to my friends and listeners who are looking for a seed bank. That's Hembra, spelled Hembra. Hembra is not just another seed bank. Hembra is a woman-operated boutique cannabis genetics provider that only sells thoughtfully curated seeds from the top names in cannabis breeding. With over 50 breeders and over 500 strains to choose from, you will certainly find something you'll love. Hembra Genetics has something for everyone, with over 350 feminized strains, 200 regular varieties, and over 100 autoflowers to choose from. Names you can trust, like Humboldt Seed Company, Night Owl, Canorado, In-House Genetics, Fast Buds, and Gnome Automatics. We both know that there are other seed banks who will take your money, but have no customer service. I invited Hembra to advertise on Shaping Fire after hearing so many good stories about them from my friends. They have A-plus customer service with lightning fast response times. In most cases, Helene and Caitlin will get your order out the same day you place it, and you'll usually receive your seeds in just a few days. Most seed banks are simply not this organized or interested in getting your seeds to you this fast. But Hembra cares. You even get free seeds with every order. Helene and Caitlin get it. They have been in the cannabis growing scene for over a decade. So save a few bucks by using this discount code too. Use the code SHAPINGFIRE, all one word, at checkout to save 10% off your order. Buy seeds from good folks who will get you great seeds reliably every time. Visit HembraGenetics.com today. That's Hembra Genetics. One of the reasons why no-till cannabis growing is so valued by farmers is because the mycelium networks in the soil remain established from year to year. And we know these fungal networks are essential because they are the nutrient superhighways that extend far and wide in the substrate to feed your plants. The trouble with growing in new living soils or blended cocoa substrates is that it takes most of the plant's life just to create these mycelium highways. Dinomyco endomycorrhizal fungi inoculant reduces that time and gets your plant eating a wider array of nutrients faster. And it's 3 times the concentration of the other popular brand in the US at 900 propagules per gram of 2 fungal species selected specifically for cannabis cultivation. Dinomyco is the result of 30 years of research and trials at the Volcani Agricultural Research Institute in Israel. It has also been vigorously trialed by cannabis and food growers across the U.S. Dinomyco is now available at grow shops and on Amazon in the United States. I love using Dinomyco to both speed up the growth of the mycelium networks in the soil, but also as a biostimulant to make clone cuttings more virile. You can see side-by-sides showing the comparative growth on their Instagram at Dinomyco. If you demand reliable growing results and appreciate the importance of an active root zone in creating a thriving plant, I encourage you to check out Dinomyco.com and use the store locator to find out where you can get yours. That's DYNOMYCO.com. Shaping Fire listeners can get 10% off any size of Dinomyco on Amazon or Dinomyco.com by using the discount code SHAPINGFIRE, one word, no caps. Whether you are starting with new beds or pots, or if you want to add some zing to tired soil, choose Dinomyco to maximize your plant's potential. Dinomyco endomycorrhizal inoculant. Businesses everywhere are striving to reach people through advertising. We all know, though, that trying to reach a cannabis audience with a quality message is pretty difficult. That's why many people choose to advertise on the Shaping Fire podcast. Advertising on this show allows us time to talk about your product, service, or brand in a way that really lets people know what sets your company apart from others. Bold people who own companies know that getting into relationship with their customers is essential, and that is what we offer. We will explain your service or product, what sets it apart as desirable, and help our audience get in contact with you. It's pretty simple, really. Advertising does not have to be all whiz-bang, smoke, and mirrors. Nowadays, I find that people prefer just to be spoken to calmly, accurately, and with good intentions. If you want to make your own commercial spot, well, you can do that too. During these pandemic days, conventions and cannabis events are pretty poorly attended, but podcast listening is skyrocketing. With a commercial on Shaping Fire, you'll reach your customers in the privacy of their headphones right now, and will continue to reach new listeners as they explore the Shaping Fire back catalog of episodes again and again for years. A spot on Shaping Fire costs less than a printed postcard per person, and the Shaping Fire audience is full of smart cannabis enthusiasts, cultivators, and entrepreneurs who are always curious to learn. Do yourself a solid and contact us today for rates on podcast and Instagram advertising. Email hotspot@shapingfire.com to find out more. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I'm your host, Shango Los, and my guest today is cannabis breeder Dan Jimmie. So before the break, we hit the first big challenges that we find with autoflowers: seed inconsistency, light intensity, yield, and terpene profiles. And we're going to start off second set with probably the most disappointing and argued about aspect of autoflowers, which is transplanting. And so I'll go ahead and get this one started for us, Dan. So autoflowers are very sensitive to shock. They do not like to have their roots messed with. Unlike other plants, where we can, a photoperiod specifically, where we can, pop them up as we go from, the germination tray into a 1 gallon or a party cup or something, and then up to a 5. And if you're going to continue up, you can do that quite easily. And some folks will even say that it helps the roots to mess with the bottoms of them a little bit. While that is a debatable thing, some people encourage people to actually touch the roots, which is just not something that would be recommended with an autoflower, because when you touch the roots of autoflowers, it absolutely causes them shock and retards their growth. And, you might change a plant that would have been a 3-foot plant into not getting any more than, 10 inches because their life cycle is so short. That amount of shock to the root system will never really allow them to fully recover fast enough in time for them to really express themselves through the flower. Well, what do you tell people about transplanting, Jim? Dan?
I typically recommend not doing it. Can it be done? Yes. Does transplanting encourage and promote rapid root growth into the new medium? Yes. But again, with the mechanics of the autoflower, grow that thing in the final pot. And I've seen, people who can successfully transplant. They've done a good job at it. They don't mess with the roots much. But my primary recommendation is don't transplant it. Start it off in a 3 gallon pot. Cloth pots work the best. They seem to help develop the root system in a manner to where the plant feeds better, more frequently, and it'll fill those pots. There's a lot of controversy on it, and I understand that. And even in and that goes either if you're organic or you're in fertigation or you're using salts, any of the methods. The only time that I think that you could safely transplant and not really do massive stress translating to the early triggering of flower on an autoflower is deep water culture. You start it in a smaller basket until the taproot drops below or in a smaller bucket until the taproot drops into the water, and then put it into the final reservoir. Because typically those people are starting them in rock wool or rapid rooters, and it's surrounded by all the hydrotron and stuff. So you're really not shocking it because those roots haven't really you don't have the opportunity to touch them like you do, say, in cocoa or soil or a soilless medium. I think the safest transplant method I have ever seen with autos is definitely going to be deep water culture. But I'll bring it back, just if you do shock that root system, it translates to lack of recovery for the end result plant. It's not going to be able to be as vigorous as it was if you're in there gorilla handing that root ball. Don't break up the roots. Don't sit there and try to, make the roots a little bit looser, because chances are you're going to cause unwanted and unneeded stress to that plant.
So the only solution that I have found for, I will use the term transplanting loosely, but a solution to not germinate in the pot that I'm going to leave the plant in is actually by using some sort of vessel to germinate the seed in, and then move that vessel to the final pot. And so I'll give you a couple examples. Now, anybody who's been listening to my show for any amount of time knows that I'm not a fan of using peat moss, because it is a unrenewable resource when we pull it out of the peat bogs. That said, I do still have those little peat moss expanding discs that they look like a $50, like a silver dollar kind of thing. And then when you get them wet, they grow up to be like 1.5 inches tall. Back before I kind of turned away from peat, I bought like a 200 pack of those. So they still have them floating around. So I use them to experiment with. And so what I found is I found success with using one of those peat discs. And for the water, I use compost tea. So it's got, some living nutrition that's in there. And then I will germinate my seed in that peat, that peat disc that it's now expanded. And by the time the first pair of cotyledon leaves have shown themselves on the seedling, that is just about how long it takes for the taproot to reach the bottom of that little plug. And I want to be moving it over to its final pot at that moment. And so while you are technically, repotting it or transplanting it, you're never actually touching the root zone at all. You're really just taking one pot and then putting that pot into a bigger pot. And I have found that to work. And when these peat discs are all used up, the new strategy that I'll be using is there are a lot of these small hemp starter containers. They kind of look like the bottom of an egg crate. And what I'll do going into the future is I will put soil into one of these like little hemp cups, if you will, and start the seed in that, and use the same timing and let the plant grow through the fine hemp bottom on that cup. And so you get the advantages that you want from transplanting, meaning that you can start a whole bunch of seeds together in a tray without having to, have that many full-size pots. And then you can select the plants that you want to have continue on in their life cycle. But that is one hack that I have found to kind of get around the inconvenience of not being able to transplant. What solutions have you found to work around this, Dan?
In the past, what I like to do is double layer. If I feel the need to transplant, or if I'm looking for, transplant shock resistance, is use 2 solo cups. So you cut the bottom out of one solo cup. You place that cup inside of a solo cup that has its bottom still intact. Fill that with your starting mix or your organic soil or your cocoa, whatever your medium may be, and then germinate that seed in there. And then you can allow it to go a little further than what you do, as far as before, the first true set can really come out, maybe even starting into seeing the second set starting to develop in the center of that plant. And then what you can do is literally remove the outer cup. You have an exposed root ball already. You don't have to pull the plant from a cup, and you can set that cup right down into your next pot. And, I see it as called a tiered method, because now you have this slight raised root ball above your main pot, but it's also caused a lot less transplant shock that I've seen. It's been the easiest way to move, or it's been the easiest vessel to allow a little bit more growth and move that plant to another pot without the massive transplant shock.
I like that idea. That sleeve idea is a pretty good idea. But the time that it will take for the root to go down alongside the inside of that first solo cup gives you a lot more time to play with. Whereas these small plugs that I'm thinking about, you really only have a few days. So you need to be on your game and you need to be paying attention. Whereas, the height of a solo cup is what, at least 3 times the height. And so it gives you a lot more time to respond. Especially if you're not a full-time grower and you've got to go to work and stuff. Well, with the smaller plugs, when it's time to move them to the big pots, they're not going to wait for you. You must do it. Whereas I can imagine with your tiered sleeve method, you've got a lot more days to go with. So the way I'm picturing it, Dan, your final pot will actually have the white ring of the plastic party cup, like on the surface of the soil throughout the growing cycle. Is that accurate?
Actually, a little bit higher, because what the nice thing about this is it allows you to give that taproot a bigger vertical drop. And with that bigger vertical drop, you've got the soil that's already around where the main plant is growing. So that's going to have to be watered through your watering methods too. But if you leave it a good, 2.5, 3 inches above the soil, enough to where the bottom the bottom container can hold the cup stable and then have that elevated room, you're giving yourself that drop. And so, I usually don't go all the way down in, because like in my brain, those roots then have to come down out of that cup, and then you're losing that top, like potential 3 to 4 inches of soil in that pot. So you kind of want to find the happy medium between the two, so where it can take advantage of the entire soil volume in the destination container.
Dan, I can imagine that there's some people listening who would, who are more visual learners who would really like to see this. Do you happen to have a photograph of your tiered method on your personal Instagram that people could go hunt up?
I think I might, and it may be way back, but what I can do is I do know where I can go harvest the pictures, because it was a method that I was using for a very long time on the Autoflower network to help people avoid transplant shock and to grow bigger plants 6, 7, 8 years ago. There's pictures of it all on there. I know there's gentlemen that still on the Instagram today, I still see them running this method that have, trickled over from AFN to move, into the social media platform of Instagram. But I definitely can find some pictures for it and get it on there, like to update that in content.
Right on. So if you're interested in seeing a picture of it, Dan will have that on his personal Instagram by the time this episode comes out. And so that's full duplex _ AFN. All right. So that's pretty much the deal with transplanting. And once you are established in autoflowers and you want to start developing methods that you think might work for transplanting, I fully support it. Like Dan and I continue saying, we are still in the very early days of autoflowers. And so developing new techniques are great. But from Dan and I's pretty vast experience with autoflowers, we have not seen successful ways to touch the roots and startle the plant and then still have the plant going, turning out not well. But so we definitely don't recommend it to anybody who's new to autoflowers. But hey, I've got an open mind. I know Dan does. So if you actually develop technique for transplanting, by all means, publish that up and share it with all of us, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I am not against the transplant idea. I understand why folks do it. If you are new to autoflowers, would I suggest it? No, I wouldn't. Get to know the mechanics of the plant and understand what it could potentially do to your future yield and harvest. But by all means, if there's something that you have found out, may it be cultivar specific or looking over the plant and understanding that this method has worked for you every single time, I'd love to hear it.
Right on, which brings us to the topic of stunting. And, there are so many things that you can do to your plant that would end up causing it to be stunted. Honestly, some of the varieties of autoflowers I have worked with, it's just like, if you look at it wrong, it's going to stunt. And this is a real pain in the ass because, photoperiods, they really do seem to be, quite resilient right out of the gates. But autoflowers really do feel like they are looking for an excuse to stunt. And I guess for people who are unfamiliar with this idea of stunting, that's where the plant will reach a point at maybe, somewhere between 2 and 8 inches, and it will just stall and it'll continue maturing, but it's not putting on any more weight, no more leaf mass. It will eventually flower too, but you'll get one nug on it that is mature, and it's really a drag, especially when you're buying seeds. And most of the quality autoflower seeds are $15 or $18 per seed, so you want to be damn sure that you're not doing anything that are causing of stunting. Dan, why don't you run down a quick list of some of the things that you've seen cause stunting on a plant?
I mean, first of all, we'll talk about, real quick, transplant.
Right.
Transplanting will definitely cause stunting, high light power, too much intensity. I know that's bouncing back to an earlier subject, but the light intensity will cause that. Overwatering. If you overwater it, if you're too, excited about growing it, take your time. Remember that, this is a seedling and it doesn't require as much water as you think it does. Underwatering. If these roots run into dry patches or the bottom of your pot's dry, the sidewalls are dry, and it's only got a core center that's maintained moisture, there's like a happy medium, that'll cause them to stunt as well. Temperatures, cold temperatures can cause them to stunt. I haven't really seen an issue with high temp causing the stunt, but I think that grouping right there would be the biggest set of triggers that I've seen regularly that cause stunting.
Yep, I agree. And your temperature is a good one to point out too, because, we're all always so excited to get outdoors during the summer to get our photo period seeds popped and outside so that we can grow the biggest plants possible for the summer that we get. But, since autoflowers are only going to, have a life cycle that's, 80 to, let's say 65 to 100 days, you really don't have to rush going outside. With my photo periods where I live, I'm often really tempted to take them outside in May. But in May, you can still easily get nights that are sub 50 degrees, and a photo period will handle that no sweat, especially if you take a moment to harden them off. But that is not true of an autoflower. If you put an autoflower out in May where I live and we get a couple of those cold nights without a really warm day after it, that's it. The plant will be startled and it will never recover from it. And I have done this. I did this a few years back to 30 seeds. Ouch. And of the 30 seeds that I had outside, only 2 of them continued on, and I ended up having to start all over again with new seeds, and that's an expensive error.
It is, and it can be an expensive error, especially if you're purchasing FEMs. I mean, you talked about the prices of seeds recently, or just a moment ago, and it's going to be frustrating. You go out there and some simple mistake like that of not being cautionary, it could cost you to restart everything again, reboot the entire run that you're planning to do. So just try to be, I always suggest people are like, take a look at your hardiness zones, read an almanac, take a look. I mean, a lot of your extension offices in the area are going to give you ground temperatures and nighttime temperatures, and just kind of watch that and do your planning for your outdoor crop based upon those things. I mean, I've been using that. I mean, my grandfather taught me that eons ago. It's like, we always had a farmer's almanac. We always had a moon phase calendar. And, we always checked the university's extension offices for ground temperatures, air temperatures, and everything before planting his garden vegetables. So I think we should take the same care in this to avoid that typical environmental stressor.
Also, the general rule of thumb I suggest to people who are new to autoflowers is to germinate on June 1st, because for the contiguous U.S. states, there's pretty much nowhere that is not going to be safe by June 1st. And if you start a plant June 1st, and let's say on the low side, let's say you've got a 65-day plant, it'll grow all of June, all of July, and you are harvesting, the beginning of August. So most of the U.S. is got drought then. So it's going to be fantastic for not causing mold in your flowers. But like even 100-day plant, right? I talk a lot about the lion claw cultivar on this show that I really like. And so that's 100 days. And so, instead of the middle of August, it's going to be the middle of September for that. But that's still drought season where I live, and it's still incredibly warm, and it's going to be the best warmth of the year where I am for finishing a plant in heat, And so So feel free to just, you by all means, you should be aware of your almanac just to be more connected with the world around you, and they're fun to look at. But also, if you are a patient or if you're a home grower who just wants to get the cannabis and you don't necessarily going to make this like a full-time mental hobby for yourself, feel free to just germinate on June 1st, because I can't think of anywhere in the continental US that would have a hard time with that. One other thing I want to point out before we move on from stunting is, we get into relationship with these plants. Growing things can be emotional. A lot of us take a lot of pride and ego out of these plants. Do not beat up on yourself if you get a plant and it stunts. Like, you're not a bad person. You may not have even done anything wrong. Some plants, some autoflowers, even when you treat them perfectly, they still stunt. And this has to do with the seed inconsistency that we started the show with. Some plants just stunt, and it's a drag, but take it easy on yourself. This is part of this. It also, adds some risk when you're deciding to spend $18 on a seed too, because, I would say there will be something that's going to stunt out of most packs from that you can buy for autoflowers, which is one of the reasons why going with more established breeders or people who have got more worked lines will be to your advantage if your money is tight and every seed needs to be a home run. But I also really like growing new seeds from new breeders. So I know that there's going to be some additional stunted plants in there, and you just need to plan for it. So if you get a plant that's stunted, figure out what you may have done wrong and use it as a learning experience, but don't throw yourself under the bus about it, because it happens to all of us.
It absolutely does. And, you bring up something else, too. I did forget to touch on something that's new to me, and we've had a conversation about it, and I've seen it personally, is if you have a cover crop in your pot, if you are an organic grower and you're running a cover crop and say you're not growing in like a traditional bed, you're growing in like 10, maybe 15-gallon pot indoor, and you have a very established root robust cover crop, you could potentially drown out the roots development for the auto, causing that stunt. Whereas that taproot can't develop properly because the cover crop has just consumed the pot.
I'm not too proud to say that's me, man. We're talking about me. I'm that person. So that's what happened when I grew your methanes, right? I had a light that was too intense, and then I didn't realize until after the fact that my pot was totally root bound, not with the plant, but with my green mulch, my cover crop, if you will. I really love using Dichondra repens. Well, the Dichondra repens had been in that pot since it was outdoor this summer. And the repens had totally taken over the pot. And when it was stunted and I took the soil out of the pot to see what was going on, the thing was like wall to wall roots of the cover crop, and the plant never had a chance.
Well, and I wasn't just, we had that conversation because I also had that experience 2 seasons ago in my hugelkultur bed. Anything that I had successfully transplanted into my hugelkultur bed, which has a very dense cover crop of 2 to 3 different species of clover, anything that I direct germinated into that hugelkultur bed, they didn't thrive at all. And it was across multiple varieties, and not just stuff from myself, but from fellow breeders and friends and, seeds that I have traded. And then anything that got transplanted into that bed that already had a more robust root ball survived that stunning phase. So both of us, it was the thing that we both kind of had an aha moment about, and learning a whole new method of what could potentially cause an autoflower to stunt.
Right on. So the next topic we're going to talk about is topping. And I think that you and I have had different experiences around this one, Dan, whereas I do not top my autoflowers. I absolutely top my photo periods when they're indoors, but outdoors, but with autoflowers, I don't top them because I see their life cycle to be too short for me to mess with startling them at all. And when I have topped them, I don't see them always develop larger colas on the next set of branches like I do with photoperiods. And so since I don't see that work reliably, I just don't top them at all because I don't want to cause them stress in any way. How about you?
I don't top either. My personal preference is to let that plant go. The genetics will speak for themselves. Your side branches, especially if you're growing outside, you're having more exposed light. You're getting light all the way around the plant rather than just directly down on the plant. And I've never seen the need to top. Now, I do know that there are a lot of guys out there that are very successful at topping. I've seen several plants produce colas that are just as big as what a main cola would have been on, the secondary and third branches, resulting from the hormone shift of the topping. But I think you have to know the cultivar as far as is it known to be able to handle the topping? I think that's when it comes back to doing the research and seeing what people have done and successfully done and repeated successfully, rather than just taking that photoperiod mentality to the autoflower and just saying, okay, we're 2 nodes deep, 3 nodes deep. I'm going to go ahead and top this thing, give myself, 6 side branchings or 8 side branches or however many you want, depending on where you top it. I think that it's a frustrating point because I know a lot of people that have grown photoperiods and want to get into autos, and they find it as a major deterrent because if they top it, and it's not one that's known to be able to take top, they have your experience where it's just like a bunch of little popcorn all the way around this plant.
Yeah, and I would go so far as to say that the number of varieties that you can top safely in autoflowers is very low. I wouldn't say that, some do, some don't. You need to do your research. I would say that it is rare to find a plant that can be topped effectively. I know that they exist because I see them on Instagram and friends of mine have done it, and I'm all like, I'll be damned. Actually in my head, I'm like, man, you got lucky. But I also have to be open to the possibility that these are also very skilled growers, likely better than me, and they have got a soft touch and the right variety, and it turned out really well for them. So I guess this is kind of like the transplanting things where, sometimes you can get away with it. But if you don't have seeds to lose, or if you're new, highly don't recommend it. And the reason why it's in the dislike category for autoflowers is that I like to top everything. I think that it's a good strategy overall to control size and to create more colas. And so the fact that we can't top autoflowers, at least yet, is annoying to me. It would not surprise me, though, that over the years, as autoflowers get more depth of breeding and the genetics get stronger towards what we want them to do, it wouldn't surprise me if that evolves out of the genetics in the future.
I would say so too. I mean, like you said, soft touch. I think what it is are the guys that have been growing them as long as I have been growing them. I mean, there's a few new growers out there who have adapted quickly, and everybody has a different skill set. But I really think it comes back to a soft touch. If you're new to the autoflower game, let it ride. Don't stress yourself out by trying to figure out how to do all these new things while trying to grow a new variety at the same time. And topping is one of those things I would definitely say don't do it first. Once you understand it, go for it. But inevitably, it's one thing that I personally, again, don't do. I see it in my do not do list as well.
Right on. So the next topic we're going to talk about is similar, which is training, and I'm pretty much a training novice. I actually am only really learning how to train now as I am developing my scrogging skills indoors, because pretty much my entire life I've just grown outdoors because I really do prefer growing under the sun. But with where I live now, I decided I better learn about growing indoors if I'm going to be able to provide my own medicine reliably. And I'm a big fan of being a self-sufficient cannabis patient. So Dan, I'm just going to hand you the mic and I'm going to say, why don't you address the training? Because I know that you've done quite a bit.
Yeah, the training thing, I think it's a soft touch thing. It's frustrating too because it can, lead back to stunning. And this whole set is kind of turns back to that. It's that touch of being able to manipulate the plant in a manner that you can increase your yields, but at the same time having that gentle touch of the training. And like manifolding, because I don't like the word mainlining, it sounds terrible. Manifolding and LST, and both of those come back to actually topping the plant to get those results. If you do feel the need of training, I think LST is going to be your safest bet. Like after it's grown up and you've actually seen sex, or just previous to seeing sex on these plants, kind of tie down that main head rather than lopping it off. Tie down that main head over to the left gently so you don't break your main stem. And what that will do is it allows that light exposure to come down, and those under smaller branches will come up and start to chase that main top that you have pulled over to the side. And of course, just like any kind of LST or slight low stress training, like that head will turn back up towards the light. That's what they do. Just like when we do the super cropping outside, or we do the trellising on our photo periods outside, we bend those heads down underneath that trellis to expose those lower branches and allow those lower branches to catch those main heads to give us that even canopy. So if you do feel the need to train your autoflowers and you want to learn about it, I would say the best methodology to go with is an LST rather than straight like cutting the head off of it, pulling, splitting the main stem out to the left and to the right, and then watching it work up from there. Because again, it comes back to the potential stunting, and it also comes back to potentially hurting your yields and not giving that plant enough recovery time to actually build structure before it flowers.
Right on. So our last topic for this second set is nutrient timing. And this is something that Dan added to the agenda that I had not really considered because he and I approach feeding the autoflowers slightly differently. I start the plant in a pot that already has its full nutrition amendments already in the pot. And so all I add to autoflowers during the run myself is just compost teas and like KNF related sprays. But I do know that there are people like Dan who will sometimes amend as you start the flower cycle. So this is kind of your idea, Dan. So why don't you explain why the nutrient timing is a little more precarious with autoflowers?
And I'll caveat this with container size. Now, I am an organic grower in the majority of what I do. And during the breeding cycles, I'm doing pheno hunting, I'm sifting through a lot of these seeds, and I'm using extremely small pots. And I think this relates a majority to the home grower than anybody else. Again, that's getting into this. They may have 1 to 2 gallon pots. They have seen some really nice stuff online. They see that they get big in smaller containers, and they go out and they purchase them and they want to do an organic run. And there's several brands out there that offer pre-made, soil or soilless mediums that have heavy nutritional value in them. Most autoflowers can make it all the way through. However, I believe that there's also a timing thing too, just like if you're using fertigation. Back when I was growing completely with salts and Pro Mix HP, as the plant would progress, I would alternate between I would meld a grow nutrient into a bloom nutrient, and then as that plant progressed into bloom, I'd phase out the actual grow side of it to give an even transition of like the maturity stages of the plant going through. So as she was in veg, she got more of a grow to help the nitrogen levels and things of that nature. Once she became a teenager, you start giving it a little bit more bloom food to feed that bloom cycle that's coming into that plant. And as she's getting more into the sexually mature side of going into flower, it's going to need more of that phosphorus and potassium and things of that nature. So you focus more on that when it came back to feeding with salts. And to talk about the top dressing, I do the same thing. Is when I notice that plant has got out of its veg stage and it's into its pre-flower stage where it's showing its pistils, I know that in 2 weeks it's going to start raging into its sexual maturity of the bloom cycle. So it's going to potentially need that extra little boost that may not totally be in that soil. So if you're doing a dry amendment top dress, you need time for the microbial life to break down some of that. Some of it could be, available ready with the top dress, but there are a lot of other things that need to have a little bit of a breakdown phase. And for example, just like when we make our own homemade soils, we'll take a base, we add some castings, we add some manures, we add the perlite, the rice hulls, and we may add some dry amendments. And one of the things I do is let it sit for like 2 weeks before I use it. Let all that microbiology get up and alive and ready to go before I introduce my plants to it. So if you are an organic grower, or even if you're a salt-based grower and you're using smaller containers, I believe that this nutrient timing thing is huge. That way, when you're in flower, you're not struggling and you then turn around, you overfeed, then you burn your plant, or you harm your yield, or you come back to another impactful site of disappointment. And, I just wanted to make sure that people keep it in mind that the metabolism of these plants is very quick, and those nutrient needs could shift on you before you know it. And just be mindful of that.
Another thing to point out is that, Jeff Lowenfels has talked a lot about the low nutrient needs of the autoflower plant. Unlike, like super hungry photoperiods, the ruderalis aspect of the autoflower, I really think causes it to need less food throughout the life cycle. In fact, I think that when you overfeed them, I think that's another quick way to get to stunting, right?
Yes.
Especially if folks are using any kind of very readily available nutrient like a liquid or something bottled, whether it's salts or not. There are very bioavailable organic foods as well that just it takes no effort for the microbe life in the soil to make it accessible to the plant. And so it's kind of like force feeding food really, really quickly. And so, don't feel like you need to feed your autoflower plants the same way that you feed a hungry photoperiod. If you're just experiencing autoflowers for the first time, err on the underfeeding instead of the overfeeding side. And it's also, it kind of turns that into an advantage because you really doesn't take as much nutrition to grow an autoflower plant. For me, I'm a big fan of the KISS Organics nutrient pack for my autoflowers. And, I will use that mixed with my nitrogen of choice, which is dehydrated pig's blood. And, I'll make sure that my soil is amended, germinate that seed, water, and other than composting, I'm pretty much done for its life cycle. But I do tend to be a little more hands off than a lot of folks who like to, feed and poke at the plant.
Right, and I will second your opinion. What I use for my top dress is the KISS Organics nutrient pack.
No kidding.
Got everything.
Oh, it's really
absolutely
good. Yeah.
yeah. Like I've got a big bag, or I got a bucket of it in the garage. Like it's one of the, I use it, and then if I'm outdoor, I'll use Down to Earth All Purpose and Down to Earth BioLive. Those are the three things that I use for my top dress. The All Purpose has got a really broad spectrum of like different biological availabilities and nutrient aspects, and then the BioLive has got an even more increased microbiology in it, and the combination of the two seem to do really, really well outdoor for me.
Right on. So anything else that you want to add on nutrient timing before we go to commercial here?
No, sir. No, I think I appreciate you letting me run with the mic on that.
Yeah, right on. So we're going to take a short break and be right back. You are listening to Shaping Fire, and my guest today is cannabis breeder Dan Jimmie. And without these advertisers, Shaping Fire would not happen. So please support them and let them know that you heard them on Shaping Fire. For 20 years, Humboldt Seed Company has been family-owned and providing reliable, high-yielding seeds originating in Northern California. While the current trend is to slap one super male into a line of hype strains, Humboldt Seed Company continues to breed with precision and care by doing large sifts and back crosses to emphasize the absolute best traits that a line has to offer. This kind of breeding takes time, talent, and space to work. No matter what kind of aroma you are particularly into, Humboldt Seed will likely have something you'll love. If you love fruit, you can choose from banana, mango, apricot, papaya, blueberry, blood orange, melon, and lemons across their various strains. They have all gas, glue, and classic sour diesel lines as well. Of course, there are the heritage California strains like OG Kush, Jack Hare, and Headband, and their award-winning blueberry muffin is one that delights just about everybody's palate, especially when concentrated. Humboldt Seed Company is proud to bring to market the infamous Freak Show Cultivar 2, which has a great THC high, but looks so much like a fern that some folks can't even identify it as cannabis. It's a plant that really needs to be seen to be believed. If you're looking for well-balanced CBD seeds, Humboldt Seed Company can turn you on to CBD strains that actually have flavor, like the dill and pepper terpenes of Willie G's Lebanese landrace. Whether you are looking for regular, feminized, or autoflowers, Humboldt Seed Company has the gear to make this your best growing cycle ever. Visit HumboldtSeedCompany.com today to check out their line of vigorous genetics, download their catalog, and find out where you can pick them up. You can also check out their Instagram at The Humboldt Seed Company to check out their gorgeous flowers and the extraordinary Freak Show plant. Humboldt Seed Company. Let them know Shango sent you. Cannabis folks are innovators and problem solvers, and we like to make money. Have you developed a tool, technique, or plant that you want to protect and monetize? You'll likely want legal representation that is experienced, accessible, and shares your values. Plant and Planet Law represents a wide variety of clients who choose to respect the environment while pursuing their business goals. Have you invented a machine or gizmo that you're bringing to market? Did you discover a breakthrough environmentally friendly pesticide or fertilizer formulation that you're about to start selling? Have you bred a cannabis plant with attributes not found anywhere else? Attorney Dale Hunt and his Plant and Planet team have established genetic patents in over 30 countries. Working to help entrepreneur scientists throughout the life sciences, Plant and Planet represents environmentally positive clients in cannabis and other botanicals, fungi, water purification, clean energy, emulsions, and medical applications. Plant and Planet helps people protect what they've created. If you are an early stage company with an established idea and are in the process of fundraising, often the investors require intellectual property protections happen at the same time. Plant and Planet can be your sole representation, or they can integrate with your existing legal team and plug in their specialties. Plant and Planet is made of scientists, lawyers with a real passion for cannabis, inventions, and the environment. They have the scientific and legal depth to help you establish patent protections for your great idea. You don't have to go it alone. Friendly, qualified, and honorable legal representation is available to you. Contact Plant and Planet Law today to start the conversation. Email info@plantandplanet.com. That's Plant and Planet Law. Our clients make the planet better. After you've caught up on the latest Shaping Fire episodes, do you sometimes wish there was more cannabis education available to learn? Well, we got you. Shaping Fire has a fabulous YouTube channel with content not found on the podcast. When I attend conventions to speak or moderate panels, I always record them and bring the content home for you to watch. The Shango Los YouTube channel has world-class speakers including Zoe Sigmund's lecture, Understanding Your Endocannabinoid System, Kevin Jodrey of Wonderland Nursery talking about breeding cannabis for the best terpene profile, Frenchie Cannoli's Lost Art of the Hashishin presentation, Nicholas Mahmood on regenerative and polyculture cannabis growing, Dr. Sunil Agrawal on the history of cannabis medicine around the world, Eric Vlosky and Josh Rutherford on solventless extraction, and Jeff Lowenfels on the soil food web. There are several presentations from Dr. Ethan Russo on terpenes and the endocannabinoid system too. While there, be sure to check out the 3 10-part Shaping Fire Sessions series, one with Kevin Jodrey, one with Dr. Ethan Russo, and one with Jeff Lowenfels. And even my own presentations on how to approach finding your dream job in cannabis and why we choose cannabis business even though the risks are so high. As of today, there's over 200 videos that you can check out for free. So go to youtube.com/Shango Los or click on the link in the newsletter. Welcome back. You are listening to Shaping Fire. I'm your host, Shango Los, and my guest today is cannabis breeder Dan Jimmie. So, the big finish, set 3. Let us focus on starting with fluffiness of flowers. And, that's interesting because, autoflowers have got a reputation of being fluffier, but I really think it's important to talk about not only the fact that they are fluffier, but also whether or not you're growing them indoors or outdoors, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I guess we should handle these individually. So I'll do the outdoor part and you do the indoor part. So when you're growing outdoor plants, there's something, even though the sun is more intense than your light in your grow tent or your grow room, the relationship between the light and, in the plant is different than the sun and the plant. And autoflowers just about everywhere will grow fluffier outdoors. And, the flowers will look larger than their actual weight. And you kind of have to choose to embrace that because it's what you're going to get. And, they smell good, they taste good, they look impressive, but they are going to be fluffier, which where I live in the Pacific Northwest, where it's especially humid, is actually an advantage because if you've got a fan going, you're less likely to get any kind of a mold rot situation or a flower rot situation because they're constantly getting dried out in the core of the flower. The downside of it is if somebody is looking for those tight California style photo period nugs, this will have a different bag appeal than a photo period will have. What do you see with them indoors, Dan?
I see them as a very tighter flower. The intensity of the light, and I believe the length of the light hours that we're giving them, causes a difference in the morphology of the actual flower itself. I see tighter buds. I see better structural wise presenting that bag appeal that we're also used to. Just a complete morphology shift than being grown outdoors.
And, I really do prefer my autoflowers, how they come out, how they look, being grown indoors. I'm a big fan of sun-grown, and I think that the terpene profiles outdoors are a bit wider because the spectrum of light is a lot wider. But now that I have grown autoflowers both outdoors and indoors, I really do prefer the indoor finished product more as far as bag appeal goes. They just look sexier. And I think I'm unfamiliar with the study, but I've heard people refer to a study around cannabis that suggests that sun-grown plants actually produce more leaf weight. And so it's going to be more challenging to trim one grown outdoors as well. What are your thoughts?
I agree. Outdoor seems to have, like you said, that fluffierness to it than it does indoor. And I think traditionally ruderalis in its makeup is leafier anyway, but I have seen that increase when it's out underneath the sun. And I've seen it indoor and I've seen it outdoor, but I see it more so outdoor. And it does make it a little bit more difficult to give it that Mendo style cut where it's trimmed down and like a Brazilian cut, for lack of a better term. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I prefer a little leafier cut. I like to have the sugar leaf there. I think it adds to the flower, but it does present a little bit more of a challenge when it comes down to trimming.
When I caught you talking at the Camp Ruderalis Autoflower Cup event, you also were talking about the calyx to leaf ratio. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
So I think that is a negative side effect of the ruderalis. Not a bad thing, you know what I mean? But it is unfortunately part of, I've touched on it slightly through this episode, of something about the genetic marker of the day neutral coming across. It kind of likes to hang out together. I was growing. I see it as a ruderal trait, and my example for that is I've had the recent pleasure of talking with Nick from Green Source Gardens about his pinkleberry and what I saw with pinkleberry. And pinkleberry had that mechanic of a higher leaf ratio to the flower ratio on a specific phenotype that I was looking at. It triggered very early into flower. We're talking like at the equinox. And I had a hunch that if I added an heirloom that I could see higher autoflowering results in the F1. And that higher leaf ratio, the leaf to calyx ratio, that higher ratio just seems to be there with ruderalis. It's frustrating, and I'm working to try to select that out of what I'm doing, because it seems to be the biggest complaint from farms to home growers is okay, so we got a lot of trim, more so than we did bud weight because of the fluffiness we were talking about, because most farms traditionally grow them outside. There's not a lot of farms that are growing autoflowers in massive warehouses yet.
Right. That the leaf is so intense on some of these varieties of autoflowers that instead of using scissors, I want to use the razor clippers like they use on your neck when you get a haircut,
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, it's just so thick with the leaves. The other thing that a lot of the cultivars will have that are showing a lot of their ruderalis aspects visually, because it's true. Some look like rudies and some don't, and I tend to go towards the ones that don't look like ruderalis because they've got better bag appeal. But a lot of them also the leaves all down the flower, especially on the main stem, will look like they're pointed up. And I don't mean when the leaves are praying, right? We all know how on a bright sunny day when the plant is really happy, it looks like it's reaching up to the sun, and the leaves can kind of get this gentle crease in them, and we generally refer to that as praying. What I mean is that the leaf and the flower matter will grow at an upwards angle, and it's always reminiscent to me of the throne, the Iron Throne on Game of Thrones. They look sharp and they look like they're going up. And it's very dramatic. Now, the smoke is great and the terpene profile is great, but that looks like there's something wrong with the plant to me. Having come from photo periods, it looks janky, right? It looks like there's something wrong with this plant, and it does everything we want it to do except for look as expected. And so, I've smoked a lot of great stuff that does that, but it is definitely not my preference, and something that I generally don't grow a second time.
Right, and earlier on, besides the straight up pointing, and how we were talking about how you may have a few of them indoors and they may not be larger plants, but they grow real super dense inside. Another issue that makes them look real janky is once you get done, say you got a nice big fat baseball bat cola or a couple big fat baseball bat colas, and you got it down, it's dried, and you're going through and you're trying to trim it up to get it into the jars and get it separated, and you start separating that flower from the main stem. You start to, when you pull that flower out, you'll notice the part of the bud that was resting against the actual main stem is kind of off colored, and it's usually a lighter green. If you're growing a purple plant, you'll see reds and almost underdevelopment deep inside there, because of the way that everything with that leaf and the way that structure is grown is compacted inside there. That light can't get in there to mature that part of the flower. And that's another aspect. The outside looks great, terpenes look fantastic, and you start bucking those things down into jars, you're okay, this looks a little off, but it's completely fine.
Yeah, but it makes you suspicious. It does every single time. Every single time
it makes you suspicious, and if we had the the node spacing that we have, like with photoperiods, to where like you have a bud, you have some stretch, you have a bud, you have some stretch. Once they get into flower, those bud sets tend to alternate up the flower and don't typically grow together. Most modern day photoperiods anyway. But ruderalis or autoflowers, they still tend to do that without that offset to kind of give that flower its ability to fully develop. And it just kind of looks off. It's completely fine, but visually to an untrained eye, they'd be like, I don't know if I want anything from that.
Yeah, it's funny because that is the same attribute that gives people the big colas that they refer to as like baseball bats or your arm, right? So some people are all like, "Oh, look, it's one big bud. This is awesome." And then other people will be like, "Oh, there's no internodal spacing and it's all grown together and there's janky stuff going on along the stem." Which it's still great smokable flower, but it looks like it's immature.
Exactly. It looks immature, but it inevitably is not.
The actual definition of mids, actually.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, down to the point, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is soil germination. And one of the challenges with autoflowers is that we don't want to transplant them, right? And so as autoflowers have become more popular, it is the common suggestion that you just go ahead and germinate the seed in the soil of the pot where it's going to finish. And so while we do have, a fix for this, when I first started growing autoflowers, it was a super drag because it is more challenging to germinate in soil than it is in paper towel or some people put it in paper towel and then hang the bag on the wall so it's got a orientation to go up, but it's so easy for the soil to dry out. It's so easy for, if you're outdoors, some varmint to come and eat that seed. It's a real hassle, and unless you've got a good solution for it, it can be a real drag. So, but Dan and I and probably a lot of other autoflower people came to the same solution separately, and we didn't realize that we did the same thing until we were preparing for this show. So Dan, why don't you go ahead and explain the solution that we like for germinating in the soil?
So, germinating in the soil, one of the things that I really, really like to do is maintain the moisture kept above. Maintain the moisture on the surface level above that seed. And I do a couple things to do that. One of them is I put a little tiny, 9-ounce party cup dome over the central location of where that seed has been planted.
A clear party cup, not a red one.
Correct. Yes. Thank you. Yes. A clear, you're at the high school dance punch cup. Yeah, that's the best way I could describe it. You put that clear cup over it, and then you still have, if you're growing in a 2 or 3 gallon pot and you're trying to germinate in that, you still have a large surface area of exposed soil to wind circulation in your room and soil wicks. So if that soil is dry, even though you have that party cup over top of that, that soil will dry out around that cup and then tend to leach that moisture from underneath that cup, because you can't put the cup down to the depth of where it's going to protect the seed, 3 to 6 inches. So what I also do is I layer rice hulls around that cup. So now you've got the seed protected by a micro humidity dome with the clear cup, and then you avoid the moisture wicking and maintain a level moist soil with the rice hulls as a mulch. So the rice hulls protect the large exposed area, the clear cup covers your seed, and usually within 3 to 4 days, that seed will pop its head right up out of there. And to touch on your, not only do we have to deal with varmints and drying out, we also have to deal with certain types of insects in said soil too, especially if you're growing in large beds or if you're growing outdoors and you're growing in a garden. You got to worry about what I like to call the roly-polies. They will come through and they will eat your seedling. Slugs, if you don't have, especially if you're growing in an organic matter area, slugs absolutely love dead, decaying plant matter. And those slugs also like live plants too. And I have come out many mornings to missing tops off of these new seedlings that have come up in like my hugelkultur beds or even in the pots that I have around there because the slugs have found them and had a snack.
Yeah, I have lived that hell myself. Do you put holes in the top of your plastic dome?
I do not. I keep that dome on there until they break up and they're turning true to the light. Once they turn true to the light, meaning the head is completely pointed up, its catalins are open, the first set's starting to develop, I then work the rice hulls in around that base of that main stem and then let it proceed with my watering schedule.
Right on. So I guess that's slightly different with me. I put holes in the top of the cup so that there is a little bit of airflow. It's definitely restricted airflow so that I don't lose my moisture inside. But I also just want to make sure that it doesn't get too hot under the cup or the humidity spikes too much. So try it yourself and see what you prefer. There are lots of things that you can do to creatively not have to buy more plastic, right? Certainly the clear party cups work. I'm very lucky because of where I live. There is a walnut tree on the property, and the prior occupants had taken all of these 1 liter clear soda bottles and cut them in half and put them on the branches of the walnut tree to protect the young walnuts from the squirrels who love them. And so I'm not really harvesting that walnut tree. And so, every spring the winter winds blow these 1 liter plastic bottles out of the tree. And so I'll just go and I will harvest the plastic off the ground. And so what it essentially is a 1 liter clear plastic bottle and cut in half. And so that you can use the top and you can use the bottom as domes for the plant. And so using the top of the bottle, there's already an air hole, maybe a little bigger than I would want, but it works fine. And then the bottom, I poke a few holes in as well. And so the reason why I'm telling you this is not that I expect that you have a walnut tree at your house, but that if you look around through your recycling and other places that you use plastic in your life, chances are you're going to be able to find some plastic at your house or your neighborhood that you can upcycle into protecting your autoflower seedlings.
Absolutely. Upcycling is always a good thing.
Right on. So yeah, soil germination is a pain in the ass until you get your recipe down. And once you get your recipe down, the soil germination it becomes a non-issue. But when I was starting out, it took me 2 rounds to realize that I had a problem, and then a third round to solve it. So there's that. So the last thing that we're going to hit on here is the making of autoflowers, and I'm mostly going to let Dan to speak to this since he's the breeder here today. But I want to point out that I am not a breeder. At best, I am a pollen chucker, but I do enjoy taking pollen off of a male plant and putting it on a female plant. And, suddenly, oh, boom, something that's a cross of the 2 plants that I like. Well, when I started getting turned on to autoflowers, I was like, oh, well, I want to make some of my favorite photo periods autoflowers. I'll just put an autoflower and a photo period together. And that's when I realized, oh, they're not all going to be autoflowers. I'm introducing a new trait that is not usually what I'm doing when I'm just, pollen chucking with photo periods, which are like so easy to make seeds. So Dan, I recognize that this is not an autoflower breeding episode, but if you would just give us a nice sketch of what the steps are to breed an autoflower to a photo period, so folks can kind of get a picture of what that looks like. And if that is something that tantalizes them, well, then they can start doing their homework. But for most folks, they'll just have it in their head and they'll realize that, oh, autoflowers are a different animal. So take it away.
Absolutely. And thank you. And I'll keep it at like a 10,000 foot level that like you said, people can choose whether they want to be tantalized by this or if they want to just, leave it to the rest of us to figure out. Like you said, and we'll start with that. Photoperiod to photoperiod is very simple when you put a male to a female. And I'm not going to go into feminization. We're going to say pollen donor and recipient. You take a pollen donor for your photoperiod, you're going to pass it to the female on your photoperiod. The resulting children are going to be photoperiod. Now, with that said, there is going to be a mix of genetic expression in that first offspring. That's how the gene code mashes up. You may find some nice stuff. You may have to do another generation. Autoflower to autoflower. If you use a pollen donor and autoflower and you cross it to a female autoflower, 100% of those offspring will be autoflower. You're going to get, again, different types of phenotypical expressions across that first lot, but you're going to have true autoflowering, day neutral results. When it comes to making your favorite photo exhibit autoflowering traits, there's a little bit more work involved because you're then dealing with those varying traits that you're seeing express in the resultant offspring, or the F1 of the photoperiod cross auto. And that doesn't matter if it goes male photo to female auto or male auto to female photo. You have to search through that gene pool looking for genetic markers and traits of the ruderalis parent that you introduced to the photoperiod. So that builds upon you having to search through that set of seeds and then moving to the next generation using a male and a female from that first set of seeds to make the F2. At the F2, your numbers are going to typically increase in your autoflowering expression because the day neutral trait is recessive and you have to bring it out in dominance. And to bring it out in dominance, you have to work the familial generations to bring it out. By F3, you've got a really good autoflowering day neutral trait that's going on in there. And then you can kind of phenohunt a little bit because you're going to have a nice mix of like fast flowering photoperiods. You're going to have what some people call super autos, which is a terrible term. And it's basically an autoflower or a photoperiod that's stuck. It has some of the day neutral trait. It grows up, it matures, it sexes, and then it gets to the stage where I call optimal pollinization. It looks like 80s hairspray styles, like straight sticking out, and then it needs 12-12 to finish its life cycle. That's still not a proper, true autoflowering plant that we know them as today. So at that F3 generation, you're going to see a conglomerate of that, and by F3, you could probably find representations of your photoperiod parent that you want to progress forward with the autoflowering trait. So by F4, you're kind of honing in a little bit more. And by F5, pretty much everything that you're spitting out of the inbred line is autoflowering.
Right on. That's great. So this brings up another aspect that is not pleasurable when it comes to autoflowers, which is, so often during this breeding process, we take clones. And autoflowers do not clone properly because if you think about it, when you clone a plant, your clones are still actually the age of the mother plant. Even though they're like these new, cute, young looking plants, they are actually a plant that has the age of the mother. And since autoflowers, they've got such a short life cycle, if you take a clone, it is probably going to immediately flower because it's on the same flowering schedule as the mother plant that you took it from. Now, the reason why I bring this up at this point is because taking clones is a way to intentionally bank genetics while you are going through the autoflower breed or the photoperiod breeding process. But Dan, please tell us about how inconvenient it is when you're trying to breed autoflowers that you can't clone.
It's a royal pain in the ass. There's been and I'll give you an example. I have been chasing something for probably 9 years, and I see it out of one line. I never get a matching parent. It's either the male or the female. So not having that clone, I can't hold on to it until I either find the matching male or I find another female that comes up and I can do a reversal on to kind of lock in the specific trait that I'm looking for. It has been elusive to me for almost a decade now, and it's frustrating. And I keep trying for it. I'm not going to give up for it. But it makes the process complicated, and not having that clone also keep the seed to seed identical ability is pretty much gone until you work all these generations to get the homozygous expression to where pretty much all the seeds look the same. With a clone, okay, I can back cross, I can forward cross again, I can reverse to that. You have so many different options, whereas with the autoflower world, you don't have the ability to hold on to that precious clone that you've been hunting through and you sifted for to find. And it's frustrating, but to me, I appreciate the challenge. It makes me work harder to get to the ending result that I want.
Right on. I like that you gave it that nice spin at the end there. So it doesn't just seem to be like a bitch only.
No, it's not a bitch only. It's frustrating as hell. I mean, that's the straight and, narrow of it. But I also like to turn that into the motivation. Keeps me driving, keeps me doing what I'm doing. Because I know eventually it'll show up, but makes you want to work for it.
It's probably one of the reasons why there's so many phenos in autoflower seeds still too, because isolating these phenos without the ability to clone is so much more difficult.
It is. And that's something as simple as doing like an S1, what a lot of guys do. It's like they found this amazing female through a sift. And they clone her out. They got a bunch of seeds. They take clones at a mature state, label them all, and then flower out all these other ones. And then, okay, we can chuck these other 5 or 6, but we like these too. And, I just don't have the ability to do that. And, the ability to have that sitting around and like, okay, now I really want to lock it in and I want to get seeds out to the public. I could turn around, take a clone from one of the other clones, flower it out, reverse it, and then pollinate that same mother, locking in that trait, trying to make those seeds a prime example of what that clone only would be.
Yeah, there you go. So anyway, so that brings us to the end, Dan, of all of the things that we dislike about autoflowers. Thank you so much for joining me. Well, actually, more than just joining me, you helped me design and put this show together. So you've been involved from the very beginning. So I appreciate your partnership in making these lists of challenges of autoflowers, and then going through them with me today to, so that we can air them out publicly, so people can be aware of them, and also the ones that we've got some kinds of fixes for. I'm glad that we're able to provide those as well. And we all know that as autoflowers evolve, we're going to see more and more of these unsavory attributes get under our control. So thanks so much, dude.
Thank you, man. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to sit down and create this list and help build this show so we could get like proper representation of like, yeah, we're frustrated, but here's some fixes, and this is what we do and how we handle those fixes. And I think it's a very valuable tool and some information for people who are either just getting started or who have been growing them and are looking for answers. And to see that even though we're evangelistic about it, like I still get frustrated on a regular basis and sometimes open my door and just go, start again.
Right on. Cool. Well, thank you very much. So if you, dear listener, enjoy listening and learning from Dan Jimmie as much as I do, I recommend that you go ahead and you follow him on Instagram, where you'll be continually entertained with more of his tips and tricks and beautiful flower photos. To do that, you can either just easily go to the Shaping Fire episode page for this episode, and all the links are there. But you can also go to his Instagram at gnome, that's GNOME_automatics. So that's gnome_automatics. That is his seed company providing autoflower genetics. You can also check out his individual personal Instagram at fullduplex_AFN. So that's fullduplex_AFN. Also, this is not Dan's first time on Shaping Fire. He was so kind to join us back on episode 73 to go through a history of autoflowers. So if you are, just getting into autoflowers and falling in love with them, I recommend that you check out that history of autoflowers covering the last 12 years or so of autoflowers, what most of us are we're kind of calling modern autoflowers now, because there's a lot of interesting history and understanding in that. And then I also, since I am active with growing and evangelizing autoflowers, you can see a lot of autoflower photographs and information on my two Instagrams, the ones for Shaping Fire, the show that you're listening to right now, at Shaping Fire, and also my personal one at Shango Los. You can find more episodes of the Shaping Fire podcast and subscribe to the show at shapingfire.com and wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed the show, we'd really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review of the podcast wherever you download. Your review will help others find the show so they can enjoy it too. On the Shaping Fire website, you can also subscribe to the newsletter for insights into the latest cannabis news, exclusive videos, and giveaways. On the Shaping Fire website, you will also find transcripts of today's podcast as well. Be sure to follow on Instagram for all original content not found on the podcast. That's at Shaping Fire and at Shango Los on Instagram. Be sure to check out the Shaping Fire YouTube channel for exclusive interviews, farm tours, and cannabis lectures. Does your company want to reach our national audience of cannabis enthusiasts? Email hotspot@shapingfire.com to find out how. Thanks for listening to Shaping Fire. I've been your host, Shango Los.